My name is Les Jones and I'm a Business Development Manager with Careflex. Joining me today is Rebecca Dunstall, our Clinical Lead.
Good morning, everyone.
As if by magic, from the back of the shop, here comes Rebecca. Thank you for joining us. The subject of today's webinar is the clinical justification for specialist seating. A little bit of a change in format for us today. Rebecca will run through that. It's mainly a PowerPoint presentation with the opportunity to ask some questions at the end. If you have any questions as we're moving through the presentation, please use the chat facility. Our colleague Jessica is monitoring any queries you may have. If I just leave Rebecca wander away to load up the presentation. A little bit of housekeeping. We're approximately an hour length of the presentation. If you have any technical queries, we'll see if we can resolve them via the chat. But to be honest, sometimes the easiest thing to do is to leave the meeting and rejoin. We tend to find that lots of the gremlins magically disappear. So I will hand you over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Les.
Rebecca's just about ready to start, and I shall see you at the end of the presentation, perhaps for some questions and answers. Thank you. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Les. So as we said, it is a bit of a different format today. There's a lot of information to get through in 45 minutes, so it is very PowerPoint heavy. But please do use the chat function at any point to ask any questions, and we'll do a little Q&A at the end. We're also going to be sharing the presentation, the references, and also a recording as well. Les, did you mention about the recording, about switching videos?
Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned. Yeah, we are recording the session, so if you could make sure your videos are switched off. They should be anyway, and make sure that the mics are muted as well throughout the presentation. But they should be already muted and switched off, but just in case.
Okay, I'm just going to switch the camera so you should be able to see me. Okay, so the purpose of today's session is really to raise awareness of specialist seating, of course, but to hopefully empower you and give you the tools that you need for clinical justification. We want you to feel confident in seating prescription. And at Careflex, we are here to guide you through that process, from assessment, from when you contact the head office, all the way through to the assessment with the seating assessors, from prescription and then beyond, isn't it, Les, into that review process, aftercare and so on. But the purpose of the session this morning is to really go into detail about why specialist seating can help individuals we work with, and maybe give you some hints and tips, some evidence-based, some cost effectiveness that you can apply to your funding requests or your clinical justifications to really drive home the impact of specialist seating. A clinical justification is that evidence information that links the recommended prescription to the intended objectives following that comprehensive assessment. It's an opportunity for us as health and social care professionals to advocate for the best client outcomes, and it ultimately aids in decision-making, prioritising and securing funding for the specialist seating system. There's also a need for us to ensure longevity of high quality services by making sure that we are cost effective and that we are using funding resources responsibly. If we can prescribe specialist seating appropriately and in a timely manner, then specialist seating can be significantly cost effective. Now, autonomy and self-determination are quite challenging skills for us to master, especially with current professional constraints and economic pressures. And now I wonder how often we are queried on our equipment recommendations. And I wonder how many times we feel confident in our response and trust in our clinical justification. So hopefully today we can give you those tools to go forward with a bit more confidence and know that we are here to support you through that process if you need us. Specialist seating is critical to an individual's quality of life. When the ability to achieve good posture is affected, whether that's through injury, illness, disease or disability, it can have a significant impact on health and well-being. Specialist seating systems allow individuals who might otherwise have difficulty to achieve their optimum sitting posture, in the simplest of terms, of course. Now, clinical justification in practice, these are the steps that we are going to focus on during the session, and these are the steps that I would follow when approaching assessment, prescription, and then justifying that, especially as part of a funding request. So we want to be holistic and where possible have a multidisciplinary approach. We need to identify the needs, considering the aims and objectives of the client, their support network and the environment. We need to present those clinical findings, which will be based on our assessment. We need to state the risks and consequences of not prescribing the chair, prove how that seating provision can meet the needs that we've identified, back up any claims with evidence, clearly demonstrate the cost effectiveness of prescribing and the cost implications of not prescribing the chair, and then also outline past and current interventions. And this is just to demonstrate that we have considered and tried less costly interventions that have been unsuccessful before then ultimately coming to specialist equipment. When we mention holistic approach, and those of you who have done webinar sessions with us before, I think it's Les's favourite term as well, this holistic approach.
Yeah, it kind of sums up what we need to be doing though, isn't it? Holistic.
It does. Yeah, definitely. So in its definition, it's the treatment of the whole person that takes into account mental and social factors rather than just the symptoms of a disease. So this holistic approach ensures a true person-centered care. So not a narrow focus on the diagnosis, but also the consideration of the person's well-being. Now, by determining this key information about the individual, about the support network and the environment, will not only ensure that the provision is appropriate, but it'll also ensure correct, safe and consistent compliance going on. So making sure that long-term use continues to be effective. I mentioned about the support network. Those of you who maybe work with individuals with complex disabilities, we do often rely quite heavily on the support network. So we need to consider family, friends, carers, and involve them throughout that whole process, the assessment, the selection, the issue, and also the review process as well. And again, Careflex can support with that. Our aim ultimately is to reduce that dependency and the carer effort while still maintaining safety. We want to make sure that the equipment is compatible with daily life because that equals compliance with a care plan. In the environment, we need to enable the individual to interact and engage. The ergonomics should ensure safety and ease of use for the individual and the support network. We need to consider access, manoeuvrability. I think Les, a lot of the time, doorways, access into buildings, gravel, stairs, those type of things.
Overlooked at times, but key to the effective and efficient assessment process is access to the property. And
that's a part of that holistic approach as well. And often, if you bring into Careflex and you speak to someone like Jess, then those type of questions will be asked as well to make sure that those pre-assessment criteria that we can meet.
Prompt, wherever we can.
We need to consider the space, so not only the integration of the chair with the environment and the equipment, but also how we use the functions. Is there enough room for tilted space without banging against the walls? Is there room to manoeuvre around the buildings and so on? And another thing to mention about the environment is the aesthetics. This could actually be really key to compliance. If you work with individuals with learning disabilities or autism or dementia, and sometimes that the aesthetics of the chair, the feel of the fabric, the texture, the colour can be really key to. It's
the critical feature of the chair from the user's point of view is the colour.
And that's certainly, and I think that maybe that's something that a lot of people might, not a lot of people, but sometimes might shy away from, especially if you work with equipment stores and maybe brown or black are those standard colours. Actually, justification and a clinical need for a different colour or a different fabric, then that needs to form part of clinical justification as well. So what I wanted to do really is to run through today's presentation by looking at two different case studies to really try and consolidate the clinical justification and maybe the process that we would support you through some of the key points that need to be highlighted as part of that write-up. So we're going to look at George first of all. He's now going 52-year-old gentleman. He lives at home with his wife after being discharged from a rehabilitation setting following a stroke. He now experiences reduced activity and requires assistance of one for all transfers. He also has dysphagia, so swallowing difficulty. He reports being most comfortable lying in bed and is becoming increasingly agitated and frustrated with his inability to be able to interact with his family and engage in his interests out in the lounge or the kitchen within the home. On assessment, it was evidence that George experienced the following postural challenges: discomfort, fatigue, poor postural control and sitting balance. So he had a hemiparesis, so a partial weakness to one side of the body rather than a total paralysis. He had pelvic instability, hypertonicity with spasticity, so he's at risk of contractures developing, foot drop and increased body weight and size. So these are the things we'll be highlighting in that justification, the clinical findings and the needs. Now, stroke, the injury to the brain that's caused during a stroke can lead to widespread problems, and many people who have a stroke may need a long-term support to help them regain as much independence as possible. And that recovery process will totally depend on the effects and the location in the brain and the severity of that damage. When we think about George and highlighting his risks as part of that write-up, we want to highlight the postural deterioration. So the risk of fixed postures, irreversible changes, contractures, scoliosis. Obesity, so an increased risk of a second stroke because of his reduced physical activity. Poor physiological function, especially unsafe eating and drinking because of his swallowing difficulties, and the inability to remain upright for long periods of time because of the fatigue and the leaning within the chair. Increase in his risk of aspiration and infection. Prolonged sitting in undesirable positions leading to this pressure injury risk as well. All of this then leads into poor well-being because he's becoming isolated, frustrated, low in mood, being restricted to his bed and to the four walls of his bedroom. And all of this together will impact on his rehabilitation potential. Now, the Hydroflex is what offered George the best range of function accessories to not only support his posture, but also encourage physiological function and manage his pressure injury risk. So we're working our way through that clinical justification now. We're now introducing the seating solutions and all the functions and accessories that can meet the needs that we identified during the assessment process. So a contoured backrest to manage that muscle weakness and support his core sitting balance to try and get comfort and some trunk symmetry. An inline headrest to offer a midline position for the head, not only safe for eating and drinking, but also to interact with the environment as well, because it's got cutouts so it doesn't impact on peripheral vision. Elevating channel leg rest to provide a comfortable lower limb position that's aligned so that it doesn't impact on the position of the pelvis. Tilting space following a risk assessment and some advice from the MDT as well because of his swallow and his dysphagia. That can help promote comfort and relaxation. Again, I'm going through these function accessories because that's not the purpose of today's session, but we have got lots of stuff on the website and relays, especially more detail on the products. We've got clinical justification documents for each of the products as well, so for the different accessories, if you needed that support. Lots of how-to videos, yeah, so if you need more details on the chairs and what I mentioned in terms of these functions, then just pop something in the chat and we can send. The how-to videos will give you a good appreciation of how the different accessories, impact on the chair. Yeah, we haven't got the time, sadly, to go into detail about what all these different functions are, but just to really highlight how they can help individuals like George. And then the introduction of a 4-point pelvic belt, of course, following a risk assessment again, to maintain the pelvis, just keep it stable at the back of the chair. And a key point to remember that comfort is entirely subjective. So we're relying on individuals like George to self-report increased comfort levels, especially in their behaviour and their mood. So that comes into the review process as well. We have had chairs on trial where we've put timetables and feedback forms and charts in place as well to make sure that we've got that extra objective evidence to show that that chair is having the intended outcomes. Yeah, it's key for any kind of trial process that it's managed and organised and focused. Otherwise, you leave a chair somewhere for a week and you go back and how did you get on with the chair? And that was okay, it's not too bad. And you lose an opportunity then because again, we have to evidence. Our clinical justification has to be evidence-based, not only from the research and legislation and so on, but actually from the individual proving how it has a positive impact and why that's cost-effective. Now, in terms of his energy management, because this was a key risk for him in reducing his quality of life, but that prescription allowed him to be more involved in activities of daily living. including interacting with the family, engaging in his hobbies, because it gave him an opportunity to rest and recuperate before coming back to upright, so he had more energy throughout the day. Tilting space was a key part of that to achieve energy conservation without affecting the hip and knee angles. Just briefly, tilting space is where the whole seating system tilts, so it doesn't necessarily have an impact on pelvic stability because we don't affect the hip and knee angles, whereas back angle recline is where we change the hip angle, opening up the seat and base the seat and back angle, so we can actually see an impact then on postural stability. We might see things like tone and involuntary movements kind of shoot through the roof. So as George's body segments work together efficiently, his energy conservation improved too. So really this is how much detail we need to go into as part of the clinical justification to really drive home why we need that piece of equipment. In terms of his posture, looking at things like a contoured back in combination with appropriate seat depth and seat width to get that postural stability. We need that pelvic stability, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail around the evidence base, but we need that postural stability to free the upper limbs from their lower bearing role so that they can engage in activities and provide some functional movement. We discussed about the 4-point pelvic belt with a slight tilt for further stabilization of the pelvis, and also an articulated head support as well, because he still had a remaining slightly increased thoracic kyphosis. So again, to fill in those gaps, bringing the chair to the head so that we do have full total body support at all body segments. And things then, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the chairs, but this is how much detail we're going into, looking at the whole seating system and addressing all those functions, all those accessories, and why it's targeting different areas of need for George.
If we need to look at any of the features or accessories at the end, we've got 5 minutes.
Yeah, if there's a particular function that you haven't heard of or you want a bit more detail on in the end, pop it into the chat and we can run through that at the end. Now, moving on to the evidence base to support the seating prescription and how it meets the needs. Now, stroke care requires an appropriate environment that includes easy access to aids for rehabilitation, including chairs of the correct height and providing appropriate postural support and pressure redistribution. Now, all of these facts I'm going through now, but we'll have the reference list at the end. Some of them are specific to stroke, some of them are more generalised towards posture in general. And again, if there's a specific diagnosis, or if you're working within neurology or elderly care or learning disabilities, then we can help you through that process as well. We've got lots of different references on record, and I hope we can help you to justify how important specialist seating is. Now, as soon as an individual is capable of sitting out, we need to facilitate that. So obviously there's going to be a period of recovery following a stroke, but as soon as they enter that rehabilitation and they're able to sit out, we need to support that in a timely way, because that's what's essential to building up their tolerance, to get that maximum stimulation and give a sense of normality to improve their well-being. Now, the aim of positioning is to promote this optimal rehab. So we're increasing postural awareness and protecting the body segments. We're modulating the tone, the muscle tone for functional movement. We're providing sensory information and increasing that stimulation, especially to the affected side. Preventing secondary complications such as pain, pressure injuries, and so on. And specialist seating can offer a solution for balancing 3 key considerations, especially when it comes to stroke rehab. Comfort, the compliance and consistency that comes with that. Energy conservation, so the interaction and engagement and in daily living. And postural support then to get that control and stability. Now, lack of postural care in sitting can cause tension on the body and increase the risk of secondary complications. Poor positioning has been demonstrated that it can decrease fatigue. Proper positioning has demonstrated that it can decrease fatigue while helping to alleviate chronic discomfort. Now, that comfort is the top priority of your care flex. Is our main goal with individuals, because that's what will have a big impact on compliance. Research has shown that if the individual isn't comfortable, then they may not use the chair, regardless of the clinical benefits that we are trying to sell. When an individual has a stroke, they can often experience fatigue, as we've mentioned, but this unsupported posture will cause fatigue by making inefficient use of the body structure. So these gravitational forces can have a negative impact and make it really difficult and effortful for George to remain upright against gravity, especially with his muscle weakness and his abnormal muscle tone. Fatigue will then have a significant impact on his ability to engage in daily living, as well as the psychosocial and social factors as well. It's also worth mentioning, again, I tend to go on these off on a tangent. It's really hard to not go into more detail, but keeping this to 45 minutes. Fatigue can have can be associated with quite significant postural challenges as well. Things like kyphoscoliosis and contractures. We've got a really good info centre on the website, so if you want to read more about kyphosis and scoliosis or contractures, if these are new terms to you, or if you just want to review, and there's some info on the website as well on that. Now, research has shown that early implementation of fatigue management strategies into daily life is critical, because this is what reduces the likelihood of that fatigue becoming chronic. Specialist seatings can encourage this vital energy conservation, and then we need to get across in that clinical justification all those different functions and accessories that targets energy conservation, which we covered in those seating solutions: tilt in space, pelvic stability, and so on. Moving on to the evidence base for postural care. Posture and poor postural care can have a severe and life-threatening consequences on individuals. There are physical, psychological, and emotional effects of this body shape distortion. Now, postural care is the holistic use of any technique to minimize this abnormality whilst enhancing functional movement. It's an approach that aims to preserve or even restore body shape for individuals with movement difficulties. And it's worth remembering that body distortion is not inevitable. If we can get the right equipment and positioning techniques in place in a timely manner, then we can help to protect that body shape. If we get that appropriate seating system, then we can support physiological functions, respiratory, circulatory, swallow patterns, eating and drinking behaviours as well. So let's move on to cost effectiveness. Again, this still comes into this evidence base, but sometimes we need to justify the price tag that can come with specialist equipment, with disability equipment, the design and engineering that goes into things like this, but we still need to prove to purchasers and why putting specialist seating in place will actually in the long term have be cost effective and be able to keep high quality services going for a long time to come. Now, the mean cost of a new onset stroke is 45,000, just over 45,000 in the first year, and over 24,000 in subsequent years. Interventions that are aimed at rehabilitation and reducing new and recurrent stroke are likely to yield substantial benefits to carers, but also cost savings to society as well. Specialist seating can enable this improved rehabilitation outcomes, as we've shown with George and the seating solutions that we can put in place. So looking specifically at contractures, this is one of the risks with anyone with tonal changes, but they are costly to the individual and society. It's estimated that the cost for inpatient treatment and surgery for a single contracture is around £18,000. Conservative approaches, research has shown that we need those conservative approaches to prevent and manage contractures. When used for corrective purposes, that we can actually utilise specialist seating systems as an orthotic device. So again, that's more evidence and clinical justification for why specialist seating systems can, thinking holistically, manage the risk of contractures, those with high tone, those with reduced movements, to try and make sure that we aren't then getting to a point where sadly things are irreversible and unseatable. We chatted about this in the training recently. We need to get in a timely manner before things become unseatable.
It often seems as though we're a little bit late to the
identifying those in a timely manner, and then reducing the costs associated with surgery, with other more invasive treatment options. not even thinking about obviously the effect on the individual as well, but focusing on the cost there. Another risk with George was his physical inactivity, gaining weight, and get to a point where he was at risk of further stroke and other serious health complications. Obesity can not only affect an individual's ability to achieve optimal seating position, because it is difficult, especially with body shape and size, to get an optimum position within the chair, especially with thinking about maneuverability around the home, and so on. Now, physical inactivity and obesity cost the NHS 0.9 to 1 billion and 5.1 to 5.2 billion respectively. Now, we need to think of management strategies to promote functional movement, to enable safe transfers, get continued activity and exercise to reduce these risks. A major goal in postural care is to promote good health and enhance their autonomic nervous system function as well. So this inability to sit upright can result in a decline in overall health, and this is primarily reflected in impacted physiological function. So trunk asymmetry and poor head control can impair respiration, cardiac efficiency, endurance, swallow function, and even digestion. So then we are sadly increasing the risk of aspiration, infection, and any related hospital admissions. Now, a fifth of people with ischemic stroke are likely to suffer from dysphagia, and a fifth of them are likely to develop pneumonia. Now, these are quite shocking statistics, but again, things that we can put into the clinical justification, why we need a particular piece of equipment to address those risks. And if we don't address those risks, the likelihood of George, for example, becoming unwell. If we don't manage that swallow function, if we don't get a good head position in midline, we don't enable safe eating and drinking, fifth of those with ischemic stroke are likely to suffer from dysphagia, and a fifth of those are then likely to develop pneumonia. Now, recent evidence has suggested that stroke-associated pneumonia is the main cause of post-stroke mortality. So again, these are quite shocking bits of evidence to highlight when we are trying to put provision in place. And it's estimated that 4,500 people could develop pneumonia, and then this carries a potentially avoidable additional cost to health and social care of approximately 2.5 million, as well as, of course, that preventable risk of mortality for the individual. And then, of course, the human cost. This is why we're here. We're here to improve quality of life for individuals, to advocate on their behalf. We need to promote that comfort, energy management and postural support, because it's critical to care. If we protect body shape, encourage stability, functional movement, enable individuals like George to engage in exercise and activity, then we are increasing their health and well-being. Once we've addressed those physical factors, we really cannot underestimate the importance of the psychosocial factors on overall quality of life. An inability to sit up comfortably can result in them becoming confined to their bed with limited interaction and engagement. Now, loneliness and social isolation are twice as harmful as obesity to physical and mental health. Okay, so that's anything you wanted to add about George, Les?
It was just, yeah, again, one of my cliches, the devil is in the detail, really, and you know, it's pleasing to see the overall effect on his on the well-being. Yeah, and working your way to that clinical justification, highlighting the need, highlighting the provision, the risks, and hopefully the cost effectiveness, not only to the wider economy, but to the individual as well, thinking about that human cost. Backing it up with evidence where possible, giving a reference list, putting it in black and white. And another good thing that we have success with generally is using photographs where possible, to highlight before and after as well, making it personable and giving a visual reference to actually the impact that seating can have before and after. And the visual impact is quite striking. It is. Okay, so let's look at Freda. She's a sociable 84-year-old lady with Alzheimer's disease and frailty. Currently resides in a care home, hoisted for all transfers. Freda does suffer from recurrent pressure injuries and respiratory infections, but is becoming increasingly agitated when sat out.
her original chair is unsuitable. It was just a standard high back armchair that was shared with other residents. So if you can imagine the incorrect seat depth, seat height, sliding down the chair just to get the feet on the floor, and lack of postural support as her condition was deteriorating. She needed more support to remain upright against gravity, and there's no opportunity to rest.
Pretty common.
Yeah,
sight,
it is. Yeah,
in the care home
sadly, yeah. Okay. Now, on assessment, it was evidence that Freda presented with the following postural challenges: discomfort, fatigue, which was quite quick against the effects of gravity, and then worsening her kyphotic posture, postural instability and a change in postural awareness because of the Alzheimer's. So she was lacking her ability to know where her body is in space, that proprioceptive feedback. Generalized weakness, which was leading to leaning to one side, that posterior pelvic tilt and sliding down the chair. She was unable to change position independently. One, generally because of the weakness, but two as well because of the cognitive not knowing that she needed to change position. And this would then lead in all to an impaired physiological function. So we were seeing these repeated infections. Now, in the later stages of Alzheimer's disease, and especially in vascular dementia or dementia with Lewy bodies, an individual's cognitive and physical decline can result in this lack of ability to move effectively, to move safely and independently. So again, looking at the physical, but also the cognitive factors. Now, an older person can experience general weakness and fatigue with or without an associated illness or disability. And frailty, which is characterized by this progressive decline in physical, mental, and social functions, can then exacerbate those problems, resulting in pelvic instability and poor postural control, which is exactly what we were seeing in Freda. And gravity then pulls them down into this slump posture, often with leaning to one side or leaning within the chair. Now, in terms of highlighting Freda's risks, so we looked at the assessment, we looked at the needs, highlighting the risks, risking of falls, and of course injury with that, worsening pressure injuries, poor health and serious infection, which then could lead to hospital admission, and behaviours that challenge as well. So risks to self and others, especially with repositioning. And I think what was highlighted with Freda was the non-compliance, because she wasn't comfortable within the standard chair. Her way of communicating that non-compliance was through these behaviours that challenge. In terms of the seating solutions, we looked at the hydro tilt. So this is a robust chair, and how long has it been going now? Since the 27 years? 27 years, yeah.
It's the fourth version, and there's more than one.
Yeah. But it's simple to use and it's ideal for care home environments. It offers that correct balance. So we mentioned this balance and compromise a lot. Sometimes it's not just about getting this gold standard perfect posture, it's actually thinking holistically and getting a good posture that also targets all other aspects of daily life. It can also offer long-term support as Freda's condition progresses, and being able to add things retrospectively if needed, and changing the back, adding laterals and so on.
For example, on the chair in the picture, that's just a contoured back. Maybe over time that perhaps we need to change that, adapt that for an adjustable back system. Yeah. So, there's a lot of modularity built into the chair. Yeah. Now, because of the generalized weakness from immobility and deconditioning, Freda was at risk of falls. That reduced postural control can also result in sliding down the chair, so falling from the chair as well. The pelvis has got to be stable. The feet have to be adequately supported to promote that postural stability. It gives us that sensory feedback that we need. We need to enhance those feelings of security and help keep the user in the chair. I think foot support is one thing that often gets overlooked. In situ, we actually take 19% of our body weight through our feet, so we have to make sure that we support the feet, because it does have an impact on the pelvic stability and the postural control. Footplate and the leg rest. Sometimes people overextend the leg rest and can cause issues. Both can be overlooked. Definitely. Now, the success of that sitting position and the use of the chair will only be as good as initial positioning. That's a whole other session in itself. But just to be clear, when we're talking about the clinical justification, and hopefully if we get equipment in place, our care plan is just as
just as important, that handover, making sure that the chair is used appropriately and the people are compliant with it. And no doubt that'll be a webinar.
Yeah, it is, but
in the future,
it's worth kind of
highlighting it.
That. It is, yeah. I mean, the handover, you know, often perhaps the first time somebody will try, well, not the first time they try it, but first time they'll use the chair, and you know, that first impact is key.
Yeah.
So we've got to get the little details right to make it, you know, compliant, comply with the need.
Yeah. And Careplex is there for that setup as well. It's not just a delivery service, but actually the setup and ongoing support as well. Now looking at the seating solution. So again, referring back to that clinical justification, that process, highlighting the solutions that can help meet the needs. So we're looking at correcting trunk symmetry, because this is what we need for good physiological function, thinking about her recurrent respiratory, whether there's something going on there, such as aspiration, silent, and making sure that we are promoting that physiological function and supporting the head appropriately. We might need to look at tilt and space. Is it suitable for Freda? Is there something going on there? Signposting for MDT approach, for speech and language therapy, and so on. Adjustable seat dimensions are critical. So we mentioned about our initial setup and initial positioning. We've got to get the basic dimensions right. And it's often something, if we do get phone calls of people reporting some difficulties with sitting, is one of the first things we say to check seat depth, seat width, seat height, make sure it's suitable. And that's something Freda wasn't getting from a standard armchair. We mentioned a bit about balance and compromise again. So there are options with the hydro tilt, looking at a waterfall back, which would have been great for Freda's kyphotic posture, because we could have removed some of the stuffing to accommodate that kyphotic position right on the apex of the spine. But that didn't offer enough lateral support. So we needed to finally balance that between getting the midline position and actually, because of her risk of aspiration and her repeated infections, we went with the contour back because it offered more lateral support. Tilt in space, important for energy management and further stabilize the pelvis, but again, we need to be mindful that there wasn't too much tilt, and that came into the care plan then to make sure everyone that was involved, especially within the care home, were utilising it appropriately. And then onto a soft profiled headrest again, just to give more support for the head and neck. Pressure care was an important, a critical part for Freda because of her history of pressure injuries. Hydrotilt with integrated water cell technology. Again, if people want to know more information about that, if we've got time, we could run through that at the end, or we could send some information out. There is also the option as well to do docking cushions. So if somebody does have tissue viability involved and they have a specific pressure redistributing device, then it can actually go into and be integrated into the seating system itself. We mentioned about seat depth and seat height. This is really key because ultimately we want to make sure that as much of the individual is in contact with the chair, so we have that weight distributed evenly throughout the entire body, so we are reducing the risk of those high pressure areas, especially with Freda's previous posture with the lean in. If you imagine that she was not being supported, she was still going into that pelvic obliquity, leaning through one side, leaning through the elbow. She could have had all her body weight, especially with no foot support because her feet were dangling. All her body weight could have been through one IT, one ischial tuberosity in the pelvis and her elbow. And then we're wondering why pressure injuries are happening. I think engagement, so similar to George, and really with any individual we work with, we need to think about that engagement and interaction, because if that chair doesn't fit into daily life, then they're simply not going to want to use that piece of equipment. And actually, with a new seating system, Freda displayed more meaningful interaction due to those energy management strategies that were put in place, especially when her family visited or during activities within the care home. And the soft profile headdress encourage good head position and for interaction while still getting that comfort. And I think an important thing for Freda was actually her position, the position of the chair in the environment. And actually, because she enjoyed watching TV, actually where the chair was placed within the room.
Again, you know, that's the level of detail we need to consider to make the intervention a success.
Yeah, because what we found is her old chair that she was utilising within the lounge was in the particular spot that she was in, was side on to the TB. So this was causing the rotation at the head and the spine as well, and increasing that lean. So as part of that care plan was making sure that the care home staff knew where to position Freda best for that, because she was unable to reposition herself. She needed that support to do it. So let's have a look at the evidence base then. Now, there are guidelines in place that recommend that care home providers address the specific needs of older people with social care needs and multiple long-term conditions by ensuring that they are physically comfortable and ensure that the environment encourages social interaction and activity. And this is where we can justify then that specialist seating system, because without that, how would we achieve those key objectives? Freedom of movement in the upper limbs, as I've mentioned, is what allows us to interact and get that functional movement, but we have to have that stability at the pelvis and the trunk to enable that. Otherwise, what we might see is individuals like Freda clinging onto the arms of the chair or digging elbows into the corner of the chair because they just feel so unstable and unsafe within the chair that they just want to curl up into a ball and keep themselves safe there because they don't feel supported enough to be able to reach outside of their base of support. Now, that independence is what's critical for their well-being and to live a fulfilling, meaningful life. Now, staying active can not only improve their health, but also their cognition, confidence, and mood, and research has shown that as well. So again, some really key evidence to justify that seating solution to meet Freda's needs. I mentioned earlier about not underestimating the importance of the psychosocial factors. Introducing seating systems at the appropriate time, not only for posture now, but actually for cognitive function and development as well, is really, really important. A stable posture will encourage this much needed participation in social activities, in Freda's case within the care home. This upright sitting position will offer a better line of vision for interaction. Head control is essential for that orientation and for developing communication skills. And the benefits of postural interventions include enhanced cognitive function and communication skills, which are all precursors to learning and participation. So especially with Alzheimer's disease, or those of you who might work with learning disabilities, it's really key that we promote that through their special seating system. I'll touch on 24-hour posture management in a bit because we can't just skip over that, even though we're focusing on seating. It's really key that we think about how long an individual is actually sat or expected to sit in different positions. We obviously need to get this regular change of position, but if an individual is throughout the day spending potentially 8 hours in and out of their chair, that's a significant part of their day that we could be losing the opportunity for cognitive development, for the psychosocial factors, for their well-being. And then what could happen is we see this isolation, being confined to their bed because they're uncomfortable or showing agitation. And this is why we're here to advocate for that and give the evidence of why equipment is needed. Moving on to pressure care. Now, posture and pressure are inextricably linked. The body positions will have a direct influence on the pressure going through specific body sites. And in sitting, there are some key areas that we need to be mindful of. And again, as part of the clinical justification, you might need to highlight some of these areas. For example, especially with Freda in her original seating, we can demonstrate those risks that she was developing. Pressure areas over the sacrum because the seat height wasn't adequate, so she was sliding down the chair just to get the feet on the floor, increasing the pressure through the sacrum. And then what we can do is show hopefully show in the after photo of Freda sitting in specialist seating with the appropriate setup, and show how we can reduce that risk and manage that through a practical approach. Now, the body can only withstand these high interface pressures for a very short period of time. And if that loading of tissues is unequal, or if we don't regularly redistribute the pressure, that's when pressure ulcers can occur. And when they do happen, they will have a profound impact on overall well-being and can be both painful and debilitating. Now, in terms of management, or better still, prevention, we need to do this to improve their quality of life. And a key intervention for this is pressure redistribution. By getting regular repositioning throughout the day, for those deemed at risk of developing a pressure injury, it's believed to be the most effective method for preventing skin damage. This opportunity to sit out will offer a much needed change of position to encourage blood flow and redistribute that pressure. In the simplest of terms, specialist seating systems aim to reduce that risk by distributing the user's body weight evenly throughout the chair over the maximum surface area. Again, lots of different functions and accessories on different chairs, depending on the postural need, to enable that, getting as much of the user in contact with the chair as possible. Now, the prevalence of pressure ulcers has, despite ongoing research and development, has been steadily increasing since September 2017. Part of this as well could be that we are better at identifying them. Research has shown that in hospital settings in England, this can range from just over 3% to over 27% of individuals. In hospital settings in Wales, on average, is 8.9%, and within care homes, it may be up to 28%. So 1 in 4 individuals in care homes could be experiencing a pressure injury. Now, in terms of the cost, it costs the NHS more than 3.8 million every day. The costs can vary depending on the grade. So grade 1 ulcer, so the skin still remains intact, is still over £1,000. Up to a grade 4 ulcer, where we may have full tissue, full thickness tissue, even down to the bone, over £14,000. So if you're thinking of the prevalence and actually how many people are affected by pressure injuries and the cost for each of those, this is why I think it's believed around 98% of pressure injuries are avoidable. We need to justify and get the equipment in place. And I think there's definitely a shift now. I think people are appreciating the posture has such a great impact on pressure injury risk, and it's no longer putting a cushion on top of a cushion.
It's very much a system approach, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like with seating, we ensure, pelvic stability, get something into a midline, well supported, in contact with as much of the chair as
Definitely.
possible.
And then where possible, using things like tilting space to redistribute that pressure, using the leg rest elevation, back angle recline if suitable. And then also as part of the care plan, changing position. People have different views on this, but there's going back to bed for a period of time so they can rest and recuperate before coming back upright, using the wheelchair for transit and activities, and having different bits of equipment. It's that regular change of position that's needed.
Sometimes that can be helped by going for the powered option.
Yeah,
on a chair.
yeah. So something like auto tilt as well. Yeah. Again, if you need any more information on that, then just let us know. Now, with Freda, one of her risks was these repeated infections and actually her risk of being admitted to hospital. Now, when you start breaking down the cost of the hospital admission, especially if somebody is having regular hospital admissions, suddenly the outset cost of specialist seating or other specialist equipment doesn't seem as bad. So the average cost of a day case is around, well, just under £800. If somebody needs an elective inpatient stay, maybe that's for surgery, then that cost of that would be under £4,000. If somebody has a non-elective inpatient stay, so somebody like Freda becomes seriously unwell and needs to be admitted to hospital, over £1,500. So if somebody is having repeated infections, repeated hospital admissions, and this is really good evidence to put into that clinical justification for why specialist seating might be needed to reduce the risk of these things happening, and of course other specialist equipment as part of that holistic approach. Falls among older people, again, significant cost to the NHS, 2.3 billion per year. Hip fractures alone account for 1.8 million hospital bed stays, thinking about how much a hospital bed costs in the previous slide, and 1.1 billion in hospital costs every year. Professional care as well. So if so I think this is where things like auto tilt and repositioning would come in. Thinking about the cost of care homes, obviously Freda's already within a care home, but thinking more general, if individuals are at risk of having to go into a care home, or if their postural needs and their health is becoming so bad that they need nursing care, then actually offsetting that with if we can reduce those risks from happening, if we think we can manage their health better. Professional care is generally charged at an hourly rate. So to do it in the day is likely between £10 and £30 per hour. And then overnight, of course, that increases and is upwards of £100 a night. Thinking about the cost of care homes, I think in the UK, this average weekly cost is now £814. So those with complex presentations or dementia can be more expensive than standard elderly care, because the staff to resident ratio often needs to be considerably higher. So again, these figures could be even higher for those who need constant care or 2-to-1 care, especially for things like moving and handling as well. So I guess this comes back to, again, a holistic approach with the support network, and making sure the specialist equipment is suitable for moving and handling, for example. That's one of the things we often do as part of the trial, making sure they integrate with moving and handling, reducing that carer load to hopefully reduce the need for increased care if we can manage it more effectively through their posture and through their seating equipment. And of course, bring it back to ultimately the human cost. Pressure injuries in the older person are associated with a 5-fold increase in mortality, which is just astonishing to hear, really. And again, this is a type of evidence that we need to be highlighting the risks and consequences to not managing individuals like Freda, managing their risk and that avoidable harm. And there's actually some really good legislation as well. I mean, this list can go on and on, but I just thought I'd highlight some of the things that might just help you in terms of your reference list and being able to highlight research and legislation that can back up your claims for why posture and pressure care is so important. And again, we'll send out this presentation for you to have access to it. NICE guidelines are a really good one to use as well. It's just making sure you're putting everything in black and white. It's not just our opinion. This is actually specialist advice and guidance and recommendations from boards of expertise, from the government itself, from the World Health Organization, and just making it clear our clinical justification is there for the individual. I mentioned about postural care because I just didn't want to just kind of skip over this. The chair is only as good as the other hours the individual's not within the chair. If somebody's spending 14 hours in the fetal position at night, we're not going to get the best out of the chair. I think we've done a great webinar last October with Sarah Clayton. So again, if you want the link to that, that was all about 24-hour postural care. And how the seating can play with nighttime positioning and so on. So again, if you want access to that link, we can send that out. I've mentioned about being proactive. We need to make sure that we identify those at risk and implement it as early as possible. And 3 key areas that I would focus on for individuals at risk: those who lack the physical ability to change position themselves, those that lack the cognitive ability to know that they need to change position, and those that lack the communication skills to tell someone, to relay that they need to change position. So those are the 3 key areas I would focus on as a bit of a take-home message. And again, there's some good inquiries, well, not good, it's devastating, these inquiries, but in terms of evidence-based and research to really justify postural care. This confidential inquiry into premature deaths of people with learning disabilities found a link between the failure to protect body shape and resultant premature death. I think it's around 52% of individuals with a learning disability die prematurely from respiratory related conditions, which is completely impacted by their posture and where specialist seating can play a role. So it's been recommended through this inquiry that CCGs ensure that they commission expert preventative services that includes proactive postural care. So a useful bit of reference there to include. I mentioned about the CareFlex resources as well, our website, clinical justification documents. So if you are going with a CareFlex chair, for each of the chairs, we actually have a clinical justification document, so you can essentially cut and paste from if needed, if it's suitable for your individual. We've got the encyclopedia, pocketbook of seating to take out into the field, numerous case studies and clinical evaluations like pressure mapping, published research in journal tissue viability. University of Salford research as well is all online. So if there's anything particular you need, then again, just get in touch. So just as a recap then, thinking back now to George and Freda, thinking about the process you need to go through. And it does seem like a lot of information, but hopefully it gets the outcomes that you need, justifying our provision to ultimately get that piece of equipment in place to improve quality of life. So holistic and multidisciplinary approach, identify the needs with the aims and objectives of the client, their support network and the environment, present those clinical findings, state the risks and consequences of not prescribing the chair, prove how then that prescription and the solutions can meet the needs, back up any claims with evidence, demonstrate clearly the cost effectiveness and the cost implications, and then also outline past and current interventions as well to demonstrate that we have gone through less costly interventions. They have been considered, but now we're working our way up to actually needing equipment in place to manage that. And then again, we can send all these references out. And I think that's enough of me talking. Let me just switch this camera around so we can stop sharing. There we go. I apologize, that is a lot of information, even for my speed of talking.
It's a changing format.
It is,
but
yeah.
There are certain subjects that warrant that kind of level of detail.
Yeah, we really wanted to focus. It's something we often get queried on, is something that often comes back, people struggling to get equipment. Health and social care professionals really worrying about the individuals they're working with because they're struggling to get equipment in place. So we just wanted to outline some processes that can help and kind of empower you and give you that knowledge and tools to be able to justify and hopefully not take no for an answer when it comes to the need for specialist equipment. This is why we train to do what we do, to have that specific skill set to justify it and to stick with that. Yeah.
So I wonder, Jess, do we have any questions that we need to take?
Yes, so one of the questions was, do we have a basic template for staff to provide basic seat measurements?
We could provide that.
Yeah, we've got, with the new chairs that come out, we've got an assessment and prescription guide that covers a little bit on measuring, and then it's got like a little box where you can put in what the measurements are and what the seat depth and seat width are. So depending on the chair, there are things, and no doubt that can be replicated for that particular situation. Yeah, if somebody wants to leave their details, and we can get in touch.
Yeah, I'm sure we can produce something for you, even if we don't have one at the moment, which I'm sure we do have.
Yeah, we've definitely got an assessment guide to go with the two new chairs. That could be tailored, yeah.
And would that include sort of like a prompt sheet for clinical justification?
I'm not quite sure, yeah. In terms of the care home being able to justify the equipment if they are purchased, I'm not quite sure of the question.
Oh yeah, of course. So the question was, is there a prompt sheet available for clinical justification for seating?
Okay, we've got, I mean, we've got this presentation now, which we'll share, and that kind of got just the bullet points of it, but that can certainly be transferred into a Word document if somebody wants just the headings. We've got questionnaires that tailor it down as well, we've done for specific trusts. So again, we haven't got a generic one, we've just got ones that we've worked with other individuals on doing, so we can generalise that if needed, again, if somebody wants to leave details.
Yeah, another question that came through, could you please relist the three impairments, cognitive, communication and? The
physical. So when we're thinking about risks for those who are at risk of postural decline or pressure injury, physical, so those who are unable to actually actively independently change. Cognitively, those who don't have the cognitive ability to know that they need to change, like in dementia, somebody doesn't have that proprioceptive feedback to know where their body is in space. And then those who lack the communication, so they may be uncomfortable, but they can't communicate that they need to change position.
Thank you, Becca. I think that's all of the questions we have at the moment, but of course, if anyone does have any more, please email info@careflex.co.uk, or you can give me a call on 01626 831 846.
Okay, well, I think we're just about on time. We're a minute over.
Which is good for me.
Yeah, which is really, really good. And I'd like to thank Rebecca for a really insightful and statistic, detail-packed presentation.
Yeah.
You'll get copies of the presentation later via email. So if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank you all for attending, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the week.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. And yeah, as I said, we'll send out the presentation. What I'll do, because obviously the presentation was a bit broken down for today, I'll add in a bit more detail as well. So a lot of what I covered off script will
even more detail.
Yeah, even more details, a bit off script that can go in as well, and we'll send that out.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Catch you soon. Thank you.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good day. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.